Well, welcome into the CountryWide podcast for a very special episode where we are talking about the importance of supplementation of trace elements pre-lamb. And with me in studio, who's kindly come all the way down from the mighty East Coast in the Gisborne region, is Alex Meban, who is from VetEast. Thank you so much for coming into studio, because this is a really timely conversation around pre-lamb and making sure that we're setting up our ewes for a good quality in vitro success with the lambs to hit the season this year. But firstly, we want to know a little bit more about you, Alex. I understand you've been back in your home region only for a couple of years to set up VetEast. How did it all go about from, say, going to vet school to being back with your own practice?
It was a bit of a, well, firstly, thank you for having me. Classic boy meets girl. Girl lives in the South Island, left university and initially did a couple of years back where I grew up in Gisborne, and then wanted to see what the South Island had to offer. So my wife and I moved down south, lived in Twizel for about 4 years, and then started a family, and then realised that we wanted to raise our family where I grew up, back in Gisborne. So moved back about 2 weeks after Cyclone Gabrielle hit and started our own practice. And then we're about 2 years down the track now.
So that was purely the timing and how it all played out.
Yeah.
That you were already set to move there and that had just happened.
Yep.
How did that derail your plans or change things?
It wasn't ideal for anyone, really. But it was one of those things where we could either decide to hold off, or we could just basically turn up and help out, which is kind of what we did. It was actually a good opportunity because we weren't so busy when we first started, to actually go out and lend a hand for people that needed help fixing floodgates and that sort of thing, working bees, that sort of thing. Yeah, and we figured for a career that's going to be 20 years long, it doesn't matter if you have a little bit of a slow start. But as it turned out, people got back on their feet pretty quick. So yeah, 2 years down the track, and I think we're finally out of it.
And in the scheme of things, you've been out the gates pretty quickly with regards to your business development in terms of setting up, and then now recently buying another practice.
Yep. So we had our own business, which was called Gisborne Country Vets, and then we were approached to buy out one of the other clinics in Gisborne. So that was Eastland Vets, who've been really long-standing, well-respected practice on the East Coast. And then we've moved into their premises with a sort of subtle rebrand, and it's now called VetEast.
I'm also really excited because Alex has jumped straight on a plane from this year's 2025's Vet Conference, and I'm sure that you've been with your peers talking about all sorts of great things, animal health. In particular around sheep health, just out of interest around what happened at the conference, what is the conversation amongst large animal vets in like reproductive health and how to lift our game in New Zealand?
It's in a good space at the moment. We realise that if you move the needle a small amount at the moment with the price of red meat, you can make quite a big difference to our clients' bottom line. Like, at the end of the day, we are businesses advising other businesses. The cool thing about it is those businesses are real people too, like mum and dad farmers. They're probably our bread and butter of our clients. So, the feeling at the vet conference was a really positive one, that our clients were in a good place for the first time in quite a while. And the East Coast in particular, we've had an incredibly good season. So we've got good conditioned stock and good prices, and we sort of just need to make the most of it.
It's funny, it's so rewarding to hear that, especially 2 years after those farmers have been through so much devastation with Cyclone Gabrielle, that everything's lining up. And of course, lining up animal health for the topic that we're here to talk about today, and lining up that ewe health for better reproduction. So, trace elements. Do you think sheep and beef farmers in New Zealand understand trace elements? Like, where's the kind of knowledge level at, do you think?
I think it's definitely increasing. I think even if you went back 3 or 4 years, we've come a long way, and that's sort of been well supported by drug companies which make the products. I really think it's come about because of the increase in prevalence of drench resistance. So you've got what would have been probably historically a model where you feed your stock until they get wormy and then you drench them, and then you feed them until they get wormy and then you drench them. And then we realized when the drenches stop working, you have to actually look at what else is in the toolkit. And you can always prop up production with drench whilst it is working, but when it stops working, you need to start looking at where the other opportunities are. And if you're running a system that's suboptimal in key trace elements, then that's a real big opportunity that's been overlooked. So that's something that we have really pushed, is that when you go looking, you will find it. And if you're wanting to make informed decisions about trace element supplementation, like, you do actually have to go looking for it. And that's pretty simple to do. Blood tests, liver biopsies. It's really interesting when you think that once you keep animals well mineralized with their trace elements, they actually don't need drenching as often, provided you feed them well. So yeah, I could probably go on about this for hours because it's a real passion topic, but like the 4 pillars of animal health, number 1, nutrition. It's always going to be the most important thing. Trace elements, parasites, and disease. Those are the 4 things for a healthy animal.
What are some of the main concerns that you struggle with throughout pregnancy?
Their nutritional maintenance cost is exponentially going up. And in that last third of gestation, it's through the roof, effectively. Like, it's really hard to feed a ewe enough to maintain what she's got. She's growing 1, 2, or 3 fetuses, as well as maintaining her own body condition. So that's where you see the likes of metabolic diseases like ketosis or hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia, if ewes are underfed in late gestation. When they're underfed, their immune system drops. So when their immune system drops, they're more likely to become parasitized. When they're parasitized, clearly there is an immune response to that as well. So it's like a double-edged sword, that they don't have enough feed, plus they've got parasites. They start shedding eggs, which will be available for the lambs to pick up. So they become parasitized once they start eating grass. So it's basically really difficult for a farmer to navigate that issue, navigate that challenge without feeding the ewes well enough. If you were to throw in the fact that they're also low in key trace elements, you're really going to struggle. So that's what we've sort of found, is that if you have them adequate for trace elements and feed them appropriately, the parasitism takes care of itself a lot more, a surprising amount, in fact. And I think that's a real mindset shift for people, is that they can get away from relying on drenches so much if they focus on the controllables, which is nutrition and trace elements. And people often say, well, nutrition's not really that controllable, but it is. It's stocking rate. So if you don't have enough feed, it's because you've got too many animals. And that's something that's the farmer's challenge, but they can do that with the help and advice from their neighbour, their consultant, their vet. There's lots of people out there that can help with that sort of thing.
It's an interesting point you make there, because what you pull back in stocking rate because you're reluctant to, because of production and profitability, you'll make back in weaning weights and the health of your longevity of your animals. But it's knowing how to have those conversations with farmers. Yeah.
I think stocking rate's probably the first thing to discuss. If you sit down and say, oh yeah, I'm scanning really well because we've got this feed surplus in the summer and autumn, we can tup them well, they can get in lamb, but then we really struggle over the winter and the spring. It probably needs to be a whole system discussion to see whether or not there is something wrong with the stocking rate. Yeah.
The interesting thing is how to understand the nutritional value first and foremost that you're giving them, and if that's suboptimal to start with. I mean, obviously the conversations would be led from a drench resistance problem, potentially for you to help educate your sheep and beef farmers. But where do you start with them in the conversation? Where do you go, okay, let's start here and see where you're at? Obviously, getting a bit of an average from the mob with a blood test.
Yeah, you can definitely do that. I like to sort of start with finding out what the client actually wants. Like, there's no point us trying to get them to do something that they don't actually want. Some people are quite happy with their production. Some people just want to make sure their production is sustainable. And when there's other people out there, particularly the younger generation coming up the ranks, taking over the family farm, they're the ones that probably have a bit more motivation, perhaps due to debt or just wanting to make their own mark. They look at what other things can they do. So we'll just look at where their key production indicators are. Are they scanning well? Are they weaning well? If there is a discrepancy in that number, where are the losses occurring? And that's sort of where we went looking. Was most people, if you ask them, are they happy with their scanning percentage, they'll say yes. But then if you ask them, are they happy with their weaning percentage, they'll say no. So there's an opportunity in that space. And we wanted to know whether we could increase the performance of those ewes reproductively by inputting in trace elements. And a number of our studies have shown that you can.
Mm. Yeah, it's not as an easier thing to skite about weaning weights, is it? But then also too, with the knowledge to understand how to increase your weaning weights, there's been a lot go on in how to increase your scanning weights.
Yep.
Yeah. What type of levers can you pull, and at what part within the cycle from pre-tapping through to lambs on the ground really make a difference with those weaning weights?
It's probably the whole way through. You need to get things right the whole way through. You can't have them starving and then all of a sudden fed, or you can't have them the opposite, which is often true as well in systems where they might be wintered on crop, but then lambed onto short covers. That doesn't work either. So it's trying to provide adequate feed the whole way through pregnancy, but making sure that when the pressure really comes on, which is typically the last month of gestation and the first month of lactation, making sure that ewe doesn't want for anything. You can imagine a scenario where she's fully fed but low in copper or B12 or selenium. That lamb's going to be low in copper and B12 and selenium. And if that's something that can be fixed with supplementation and it's sustainable, I think that's something that we need to look at.
Mm. Yeah, because it's sort of, we'll lock up the preferential feed for those to wean those lambs onto. The ewes will be fine, in terms of, we'll just give a B12 later on. What difference does it make giving it to the ewe pre-lamb than actually waiting to give it to the lamb itself?
Yeah, that was what we decided to look at. So at scanning time, we did some testing in a lot of the ewes on the East Coast and found that they were clinically low in copper. So you sort of have different reference ranges where they're basically deficient, suboptimal, and then sufficient. There's not really production reference ranges. It's more just sort of they need to be above a certain amount, and it's got a lot of variables like how much antagonists are entering the diet, like soil, because it's high in iron, sulfur, and molybdenum, all the things that lock copper up, for example. So yeah, when we looked for it at scanning time, we found that these ewes were low in copper. When we supplemented them with copper and compared it to a control mob that didn't get it, we found that the ewes were heavier at weaning, the lambs were heavier at weaning, and the ewe survival and lamb survival went up. So it's almost like you give them what they need, they're a healthier animal, they lactate better, lamb survival goes up. You compare it to the control mob, which is going through that last month of gestation, the first month of lactation. When they're light, they don't lactate as well, which obviously means that the lambs don't do as well. Mm. And when I say give them copper, it was in the form of a multi-mineral injection which contained copper. Mm-hmm. In some instances, we are so low in copper that we will give a copper supplement on its own. But I do need to make a point that copper supplements in sheep need to be done under veterinary supervision because toxicity is really, really easy to hit. Mm. So it's quite a careful sort of prescription that we'd offer.
What's copper ideal for in that last period of gestation and then lactation? Like, what does copper levels do in low ones and high ones?
If they're low, basically they're just going to be ill thrifty. Like you see it in cattle. Hereford cattle will look sort of orange rather than red. Angus cattle will look sort of coppery rather than black. And in sheep, if you could see the different colours, you might pick that up as well. But they sort of say like steely wool. Basically, it's reflected on the outside that they're not as healthy. So if you think if the skin's not healthy, the hair's not healthy, surely the major organs aren't as healthy. So effectively, they aren't utilising every blade of grass that they're eating as well. So like the immune system's down, they'll get more parasitized, they'll pick up more pneumonia. It's basically just, if you think of like us when we get a cold, like vitamin C helps and things like that, you just need to make sure that you aren't wanting for anything. And I think it's probably something that the more we look, the more we realise that there are opportunities in this space.
Mm. So tell us about your frustration with these low copper levels that led you across the ditch.
Yeah, so 2023, we were trying to help farmers in the wake of Cyclone Gabrielle. A lot of them had really good condition ewes because it had been a wet summer, so there's a lot of grass around, but they had fences that weren't stock-proof. The ability to rotate ewes was basically non-existent. If there was a hole in the fence, they found the grass. So we had a situation where there were a lot of ewes in good nick with a lot of lambs inside them, but not a lot of grass to lamb onto. And when we went looking for, well, it started off by looking in cattle and finding really lower than expected copper in cattle, that we sort of said, well, we'll go looking in sheep as well, because cattle need more copper than sheep. So we're sort of just going up the list until we found where the issue was. Found the low copper. I'd used MULTIMIN a lot in my previous job in dairy cattle pre-calving, and then into the calves with good results. So I sort of just wondered about the idea of putting it into sheep and whether or not we could replicate some of those increases in their immune system. So speaking to Matt Wells at Verbeck, I said, what do you think about MULTIMIN in sheep? And he said, well, we actually have access to some of this Australian product, which is MULTIMIN plus copper for sheep, so a slightly lower copper dose. So we decided to do a bit of a trial with this product, 4 farms in Gisborne, control mobs, first treatment mobs, and basically just said to the farmers, look, do what you would normally do, but just in one mob, you try this multi-mineral injection and we'll compare it to the ones that did and didn't get it. And yeah, across all 4 farms, there were pleasing results that the ewes were in better condition. So they were about 2 kilos heavier at weaning. The lamb weights were up to roughly 2 kilos as well, which was pretty significant. And ewe survival went up as well. So for every twin ewe that lives, that's an extra 2 lambs that lives. Yeah, so it was quite pleasing to see that we could impact those parameters by something that you can do every year, not like a drench where, potentially a long-acting product could be a useful tool, but you can't do it every year unless you're going to expect to get resistance someday.
When you talk about long-acting, how long-acting is the MULTIMIN plus copper?
It's not particularly long-acting. It's probably something that we don't actually know how long it works. It's probably relevant to how low the animals are at the time, and it's not traditionally used to treat a true deficiency. It's more to give it to them at a point of stress to get them through, because of the zinc and the manganese and iron, to stimulate the immune system as well. So like they're healthier for the injection, not necessarily because they were deficient and you've corrected it, which is a little bit hard for people to get their head around. But we've found that if you give MULTIMIN in cattle and sheep at points of stress, like mating and calving and weaning, that's where you see your response.
How long prior to lambing dates do you need to?
4 weeks is on label. So we aim to follow that as best as we can, and it coincides really well with a pre-lamb yarding for a clostridial vaccine. Yeah, so it works. It's quite a simple thing. So once we did this trial, we were able to source some product the following year at a commercial scale, and then this year Verbeck's got it available on the market in New Zealand. So we're pretty excited about that.
Oh, fantastic. So it's available coming out this for July in terms of...
Now, I believe.
Now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, in June.
And just out of interest, you mentioned there around under vet supervision for dealing with copper, making sure you don't get those toxicities. That on-label amount of copper and MULTIMIN, is that still you need vet supervision?
It could go wrong. You wouldn't want to give it to a lamb. I think 25 kilos is the initial weight. So under that, it'll be off-label. So that just gives you an idea that once you get down to a certain size, like you could be giving too much of it. There's certain breeds of sheep that don't need copper. They're just incredibly good at extracting it from the diet. One of my lecturers...
Are you allowed to say what breeds they are?
Texel, I believe.
Oh,
yeah, they don't like copper. They evolved in a location where they're able to live in a really low copper environment and do well. One of my lecturers used to say that if you yell copper loud enough, a Texel ram will fall over. So I've always remembered that. And so that's just something to be aware of. Like, you wouldn't want to buy this product off the shelf and just poke it into your sheep without some sort of advice.
What about lambing hoggets?
Yeah, that's still fine. Like it's on label as long as they're going to be over 25 kilo.
Yep.
So it's pretty safe. Yeah. And if there is not an issue with copper, there is a copper-free product out there. So yeah, which is quite useful. Like I think the east coast of the North Island is quite unique in our really high molybdenum levels, which means that the secondary deficiency to copper is prevalent. Whereas in the South Island, it's not quite so much of an issue. So the copper-free product could possibly have more of a role down here.
Yep. What type of areas are naturally low in copper?
I think the whole of New Zealand's relatively low in all trace elements. And I think it's just to do with the history of our soils. But it's the east coast of the North Island, which is really, really low due to the secondary deficiency. Yeah, just the natural high amounts of molybdenum.
Through that trial work, did you monitor what those ewes were like in that second lambing season afterwards? Like, did they hold up well?
Yeah, so in the trial we didn't because the results were so promising that the farmers just took it upon themselves to supplement the ones in the control mob that didn't get it. Mm-hmm. But what we're seeing now that we've done it for a year at commercial quantities, we're just hearing anecdotal evidence that the ewes are embedded in that going to the ram the following year. So basically, if they wean heavier, they require less feed to get them back up to weight for tupping, so you can hold them on maintenance more efficiently. And then if you can feed them well, then they tup better. So yeah, some of the early scanning results that are coming through this year, anecdotally, are very, very good. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to hear. So great prices, and there's more pretty healthy lambs on the ground in the East Coast.
It's one of those things where it's there's a legitimate cost to production though. The more lambs that survive, the more you have to feed, and it's often overlooked is that when you have really high lamb survival, you have a lot less feed as well, or a lot more mouths. So it's actually, there's no free lunch. Your costs will go up if your lambs start surviving, but that's a great problem to have.
Yeah, it really is. But you do need to plan for that.
You do need to plan for it, yeah. Because we saw lamb survival lifted by 9%. You put that over 1,000 ewes, that could just be an average farm, put it over 10,000 ewes, and it moves the needle a lot and affects the bottom line a lot.
Wow. So for farmers that are listening to this, obviously East Coast is pretty poor, but majority of New Zealand is pretty poor in copper. We do obviously have those quite ingrained understanding of cattle and what to look for, but it's not as commonly discussed as in sheep. And we're listening to this in winter and we've got enough time to think about it pre-lamb this season. What's the first step to get an understanding of where you're at with your copper levels and whether this would be a really good?
Yeah, I'd just encourage farmers to get in touch with their local vet and say, I'm really interested in just finding out the trace element status of my ewes. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people would maybe look at what the livers are like in the ewes at the works, perhaps the ones that aren't scanned in lamb. I'm more an advocate of live liver biopsies on a representative sample of the flock, so not the best, not the worst, just smack bang in the middle. What is the status? So your vet can come out and take bloods and livers really easily, get really accurate diagnosis of where you're at. And if it comes back that everything's good, that's great. But if it comes back really low, it's really powerful information.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even just sitting there calculating out in your situation, listening to this, on a calculator, what 9% lift in production means, it's bugger all in the scheme of things to know where you're sitting.
Yeah. No, it pays for itself very quickly. Like the trials that we did, even if you just put the value of the increased live weight in the ewe, it paid for itself, I think, 2 to 3 times over. Once you put the value of the lamb on top of that, we're getting up to sort of 10 to 1 returns. And that was replicated in our 4 little trials. But I would just sort of say, like, people need to be realistic that it won't fix an issue if feeding is your biggest issue. And that can be quite a confronting conversation, but one that the vet needs to have with their client is if you say, yep, your production isn't as well as what it could be, it's not trace elements, we need to look at nutrition, and that's just honest conversations you need to have.
Yeah, interesting. I know this is a hard question, but what happens if you do ask your vets that you really want to focus on trace elements, but they sort of dismiss it as an issue? What would you do to encourage farmers that, want to be more informed?
Yeah, I think vets are becoming more and more knowledgeable about this space, like with the likes of the drug companies that have these products, they're bringing them to market. the vets are pretty supportive of people investing in the industry. So I think you'd be unlucky to have a vet that wasn't interested in your genuine concern. If not, get a new vet.
Yeah. Great idea. Alex, thank you so much. Alex Meban, veterinary from VetEast in Gisborne, joining me in the studio to have what is a very important conversation pre-lamb around the importance of supplementing trace elements. And it's a really important time over the winter leading into pre-lamb, as Alex said there, 4 weeks out from lambing, to have that conversation with your vet. Get some tests about blood tests and some liver biopsies to understand where you're at, because you could be leaving money on the table when it comes to productivity. Weaning weights could increase. You've heard it all there. So reach out to your vet and have a chat about Verbac's MULTIMIN Plus Copper for Sheep.